everyone. This is Jessica Vaughn with C&T Publishing, and I'm here today with Teri Lucas, the author
Hi,
of Colors
Jessica.
Red and Free-Motion Quilting. And thank you for being with us today, Teri.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It'll be fun.
I'm really looking forward to this one because not being a free motion quilter myself, I feel like Teri's book is such a good introduction to all of the fundamentals of it, but how each concept sort of relates to one another, because it really does cover the free motion aspect, the color aspect, and manages to merge all of these different ideas in a way that I feel is really accessible to both people who are experienced and people who are just sort of getting started in free motion. So, did you maybe want to talk about the foundations of free motion for those of us who might not have the same, reference basis?
Sure. Um, so one of the things that made the three things that made the biggest difference for me in free motion quilting over the years was understanding needle and thread pairings, and then also understanding the two different types of tension that we encounter. So my basic rule of thumb with needles and thread is that opposites attract. So if you've got a 100 weight thread, you need a size 60 or a size 70 needle. If you have a 12 weight thread, you need a size 100 or a size 110 needle. So the number systems run in the opposite direction. The needle size is based on the diameter of the shaft. The thread weight is based on how many yards, kilometers it takes to weigh a certain amount in the system. And so when you understand those two components, then pairing needles and thread becomes a lot easier. What I further distilled down to is that with needles, I only need two different types of needles in my sewing room. One are microtex needles. I use those for piecing and then with finer threads when I'm quilting. And then top stitching needles that I use with the heavier threads, like the 12s, the 28s, the 30s, the 40 weight threads. And so by limiting it, it makes it easier to have the things that work for me in my sewing room.
And how would someone know necessarily that their thread and their needle are not paired together correctly? Like, what would that look like?
It can look like a couple of different things. So, if your needle and thread aren't paired well, and the needle size is too small for the thread, you'll get what I call bounced or skipped stitches. So the bounced and skipped stitches will look like that when the needle goes down, there's something that misses and it doesn't form a stitch.
It doesn't
So it
catch.
doesn't quite catch. It can also look as though, and this is where sometimes it gets a little weird. It can look as though your thread is going down to the back, or you get a delightful bird's nest on the
Mm.
back. So there's a couple of ways to look at that. The bird's nest can also be, oddly enough, from not threading. You can see I'm doing this because like I can feel this, not threading the machine properly. So that can also happen. But a bad needle and thread pairing. Also, if you've got a quilt, when you hold it up to the light and you see light shining through as though it's just breaking dawn and there's just that gorgeous light, your needle sizes are probably too big because the thread is not filling the hole that the needle is making very easily or very well.
And it's leaving a big hole behind that's not necessarily needed for the size of thread being used.
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly.
And chat just said thank you so much for the size explanation because it makes things a lot clearer in pairing the two.
Yay! That always makes me happy when somebody gets like this little nugget that they go, "Oh, okay, this is all worth it."
Yeah, I don't think most people think to check that their needle and their thread are paired correctly, because when I get something like a bird's nest, I automatically assume my tension or something's wrong on that end. And
Mhm.
that's a whole new dimension of things to make things more successful. I think that's amazing.
Well, that's our go-to, and I think that's the whole tension. Like, if something's going wrong, it has to be the tension. Well, if something's going wrong, it might be the tension. That's a possibility. when I'm teaching new students, particularly new students who don't have a lot of experience, the first thing I have them do always is rethread the machine, because it is incredibly possible that we've missed something along the way, and we've missed a guide. We've missed, putting it into the tension discs properly. And so by taking the time to rethread the machine, go through it step by step by step by step, then we're going to make sure that we've cleared all that possibility out. Then if it's still a problem, like you're getting bounce skip stitches, something's not quite connecting right, then you start looking at, is it the tension itself? And is it a bad needle and thread pairing? And I would go bad needle and thread pairing before I go to tension. So it's a delightful reordering of how we think about things, taking it down to the most basic thing, which is rethreading the machine, rather than going for the big thing, which is the tension.
And that repetition, the threading and rethreading of the machine, that really ties into something you had told me about repetition in free motion quilting and how that's really cornerstone to free motion. Do you want to talk a little bit about repetition and how muscle memory and learning to do things over and over again generates your results?
Yes. So one of the things that I teach, oddly enough, is and we kind of see it in the book a little bit too, is I teach a doodling class, which, I mean, half of us really don't need a doodling class. However, it's incredibly helpful. And one of the things I picked up along the way is that I doodle both with my dominant and my non-dominant hand, which gives me that opportunity to train. Because when I'm free motion quilting, whether I'm doing it on the home sewing machine or I'm doing it on the long arm, I'm using both hands and my eyes and my body to create what's going on in front of me. So it's kind of this whole body experience. So by doodling both with my dominant and not dominant hand, what I'm actually training is eye hand coordination and developing pathways in my brain so that they know how to do this. And what happens in that is, the more I do this, the more times things happen that aren't quite right, the better opportunity I have to get things right the way that I want them. So I can sit down at a machine and do stupidly tiny bubbles or, larger circles without really thinking about them, because I've done them over and over and over again, both on fabric and on paper. So I do a both and. Now, one of the things that we did talk about too was, how do we practice, we have all these practice pieces. Now, what do we do? Well, that is in and of itself a whole loaded question, because let's start with the basic thing. If it's something that we really hate, kennel quilt, like,
Absolutely. The
right?
shelters love having them. They make a huge difference for the animals. They love those.
Or find a local nursery that needs something for the kids to sit on, right? Okay, there you go. Tote bags. Tote bags are fantastic. And there are so many patterns for quilted tote bags out on the market that it would be super easy to find your favorite one, or just do what I did and make it up. Like, I just
Yeah,
made it up.
absolutely.
Um, Also, pencil bags, right? Those little zipper totes, they're good for everything.
Oh, yeah, especially for travel, you can have 5 or 6 of them in different sizes.
Exactly. And you can pair things, like if there's one section that you like and one section that you don't like, pair the quilted part of it with some see-through vinyl, and you can see then what's in that tote bag or that pencil case. Or one of those organizational things where they have like all kinds of things in it, and kind of fold them up and roll them up.
Oh, yeah.
Those are fantastic. Like, I might actually make another one before I leave this weekend.
And
But
it's
yeah,
great that you can make use of them so that that practice and that time is put forth into something that's meaningful, and you can look back and see how much you've progressed over time with each project.
yeah, well, and that to me, that progress, sometimes we make progress like this, where we go step, 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 step. I usually do progress like step, step, fall flat on my face, step, 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 fall flat on my face again. Like something will just go haywire and I have to like go back to the basics. Is it this? Is it that? Is it the other thing? Does the machining cleaning? Does, so yeah, progress usually goes whoop, whoop,
Yeah, I
which
like
is
to
really
joke
kind of
that some of
fun.
my projects, my best learning experiences, are the ones that I messed up the worst.
Yes, yes. I'm glad. You know what? I'm really glad that you said that because that is actually the key to learning is being willing to uh, really do very horribly and kind of go, okay, if I were doing this again, here's how I would manage this.
And I especially love learning from people who are regularly working and sewing and creating things, because I love when someone comes to me and says, "Look how terribly I did this. Don't ever do it this way." Because then I don't have to make the same mistake and we can both laugh, because who would have known?
Right. I don't know. I don't know if in the costuming part of this creative industry that we work in that people go, look at what I did and then start pointing out all their flaws. Like,
It's more of, I think, people try something and it just doesn't work out, and people will go back and say, "Well, here's where I went wrong." And then nobody ends up walking down that same path.
right. So I made all the tension mistakes and needle and thread pairing mistakes and speed mistakes so that you don't have to. But in machine quilting, you're gonna have to make some of I can tell you all this stuff, but you're gonna have to make some of these mistakes on your own.
Yeah, there's always the times when you make the mistakes and you're like, "All right, learning experience, lesson learned. Just keep
Mm.
going, keep your head up."
Well, yeah, definitely keep going. Don't give up. I, I've been known to put my sewing room in timeout for weeks on end until it was ready to tell me what was wrong.
Do you ever have any projects that you sort of have picked up, put down, picked up, put down until you finally got what you wanted from them?
Yes, yes. One of the one quilt that I can definitely say that with definite pleasure. Well, two quilts. They're sister quilts. One is Twilight in the Bronx. It's the black background. It's the Lone Star, and I love telling the story because first of all, it points to the fact that I'm not normal. Um, and points to the fact that sometimes we just have to continue down a path once we've gotten started. So, Twilight in the Bronx was quilted twice. The first time in the background around the star, it was very dense, very intricate, black stitching on a black background. Yeah. And at a mini group meeting with one of my friends, she said, Teri, or like we had been talking for a while about everybody's quilts, and she goes, Teri, you're hiding your quilting. It's really beautiful, but you're hiding it. I went, oh. And I did what um I took out my handy dandy seam ripper and had a long hot date for about 5 or 6 days while I pulled out 90% of the stitching. Now the quilt's 40 by 40.
Gosh,
There's
that is,
something about that. And I had it about 2/3 quilted.
oh,
So yeah, I pulled out quite a bit of stitching. And and so but by doing that, I had the opportunity then to think about what was the quilt telling me that it needed and how could I make it better? And at the end of that quilt, it ended up also being an album cover for out of with a duo out of the UK. Their album is called Gallimaufry, and Gallimaufry means a big mixed up jumble of things. Hence Twilight in the Bronx. It was perfect for it. The sister quilt is Moon Over Manhattan. And the alternate title for that quilt is Little Miss Sassy Pants because the back was supposed to be this shimmery, beautiful grape Robert Kaufman radiance fabric. So it's a cotton silk blend. So there's
Mm.
this yes, there's this delightful shimmer to it, and it's really amazing. And I thought that this moon with the star in the center of it was going to be on chartreuse. Like, every moon should be on chartreuse. And as I got started stitching, I think I got the first round of the star points done, and I'm checking the tension because I'm a little obsessed, making sure that my tension is balanced. And so I'm checking the tension and I'm going, no, I'm not listening to you. And I keep stitching and I'm like, no, I'm not listening to you. And I'm like, all right, darn it. And I flipped the quilt over because it was telling me that the radiance was going to be the top of the quilt. So yeah, quilts are sassy.
Every project has a mind of its own, and you just have to tap into that before you can finish things off.
Mm-hmm.
And with that color idea in mind, you were talking about how you had sewn black on black and it was just sort of hiding the quilting. So much of your book covers color pairings and the importance of color balance. Do you want to talk about how you sort of came to your color ideas and what process you follow?
So it's this is kind of hard. Oddly enough, before I submitted for this book, I didn't know what I did. I didn't know what I do. Like, um, I would just I would open my thread drawer and see what was I liked, and that's what I would use. But what I was developing was a color sense or a way of looking at quilting that is wildly different from what's going on in the rest of the quilting world, which is great. I like that part of it. The first really big piece that I did where I was intentionally studying color is split complementarity. And I went to my local quilt shop, and got a color wheel after seeing Joan Wolfram on Simply Quilts and decided to make this quilt using each one of the blocks is using a split complement color palette. And so like I made this ginormous quilt, and my friends had a hand in it in making it way better than what I imagined. But what it gave me is this underlying sense that I could essentially do what I wanted with color. And that's kind of when you start seeing what's coming next, because it was like I made split complementarity, and then a couple of years later I made Twilight in the Bronx. And so there's a direct, now I can see a direct path. And in the meantime, I was taking every fat quarter that I had and practicing free-motion machine quilting and quilting for other people, and kind of like adding my little spicy self to it and whatever. And so color, when I started talking with C&T about this particular book, they're like, "Oh yeah, we want you to take a look at these things and then present us something this way." And I kind of went, like, what are, like, it took me a little while to kind of figure out what it is that I actually do, because I thought everybody used different colors of thread. Well, they don't. In fact, Lee and Krista, Lee Monroe, Krista Watson, and I had a conversation about this on Creative Spark a while back. And what was delightful about this is Krista matches all of her backgrounds. Lee uses one thread, and then my thread stash rivals my fabric stash. And I just pull color, and I use a color wheel. And if I will go as far as on the 3-in-1 color tool, I will go ahead and use these filters, the red and the green filters,
Oh, the
to
3-in-1
see.
color wheel that Joan Wolfram's. That's such a great tool with the filters.
You know what? Every quilter needs this in their sewing room. Like, you must have this in your sewing room. Like, if you don't have this in your sewing room, run to your local quilt shop and get it. Now, there are a
The
couple.
link is in chat right now for anyone who's following along.
Yes.
And we have an author shout out from MJ Kidman. She said she loves your book,
Hey,
Teri, and says
MJ!
hello.
I'll see you after Road. We're part of a cohort. So the red and the green filters make a tremendous difference in terms of how we look at fabric. Quilters and garment sewers to a great degree, but quilters more. We look at the color value. So how light or dark it is. Well, one of the things that I discovered in all of this is that color is relative. So if you get a pale yellow next to a dark blue, well, of course you can see the color balance. But if you get a pale yellow and a pale pink next to each other, one of them's going to read a little darker, and it's more likely the pale pink is going to read a little bit darker. But again, so if you were doing this really pale color scheme, that pale pink would become your dark. If you're looking at adding thread with that, then and you want to knock something back or really highlight something, then you can come into the colors and go, oh, what can I add to this? Add to this color scheme. Whether you're choosing fabric or you're choosing thread, you can add or knock something back or make some very simple changes that make a dynamic difference in the quilt. So my biggest favorite feature, and this is C&T has put this like all over the place, but my favorite feature is the back part of the page where you have like a whole color wheel. You have the complementary colors. So this is the neighbor across the street. And I love the neighbor across the street. I'm going the wrong direction. You have the neighbor across the street. And then you have all of the split complement, which are the neighbors' neighbors. And they go so far as doing it in both directions. So if you want to, like, if that might be your color, but you're thinking, oh, maybe I'll go in this direction and then use this for all those bright, wild colors, great. You can also go cool it down by going in the green direction. So you can figure out like how soft or how vibrant you want your quilt. You can also knock things back and highlight them by going with this. And knowing that you can go, especially the way that C&T has those little charts made out, you know that the neighbors across the street, their neighbors, they're a little spicier, but it's not just their next door neighbors, it's also their neighbors' neighbors. So you can get everybody in. And then the other part of this that I just absolutely adore is that when you look at any particular color, you can see what falls into that color from lights to darks and see what can make my quilt look a little bit vibrant. How can I spice it up a little bit and know that it's shades and tones, so brighter adding white, tones adding black, and then getting really into the depth of what color can be and making our quilts a little bit more dynamic. Now I do this all with thread. Like I seriously just do this all with thread. So I just grab whatever is in, this will be the easiest thing to show. So this is based on Van Gogh's Starry Night. And part of this was it was part of a challenge. And so part of this is a challenge fabric. And then I added a whole bunch of stuff to make it really dynamic. So I added, not only is it a silver metallic that I have in here, but to create a little bit more depth and interest along here, I used other metallics like gold metallics and gold and silver. There's a gold silver that they have. Now the other day I needed to bind this quilt because I'm going to give it away when I go to Road. I decided, what would make this really kind of pop and, look like it's actually in a frame. And so I went with this purpley color.
Beautiful.
Right. So it appropriately frames it and contains it, but it adds that little extra something so the quilt doesn't look completely flat.
Absolutely. And I love that the metallics catch the light in such a way that it draws attention to all the detail in the fabric. It's beautiful.
Yeah, yes, and oddly enough for metallic, some of it's really subtle because of how open I made the stitching. And then the moon is clearly the moon, but that's because of that stitching is really close together. And that's also one way of changing color, changing your background when you're looking uh at a fabric. So I also have, and this is my favorite. Don't tell the other color wheels, but this is my favorite color wheel that I did for the book.
It's stunning. It is absolutely stunning.
Right. Thank you. What I love about this particular one is there were like every color wheel surprised me, but this one, um, you can see that when I left the stitches open, the, kind of like that center ring around. When I leave the stitches open, they're there, but they're subtle. When I got the stitches closer together, like up in this area, when the stitches are closer together, what you get is you get more of the color. So even though this is on a dark background, those yellows and oranges are really popping against this black fabric. And I actually expected, because of the purples that I was using, that the purples would stand out a little bit more, and they really went into the background.
And chat loves your binding, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That was a fun one. Now, I did it again. I'm getting ready to go to Rhode. So I have a special exhibit at Rhode, and all of the color wheels are going to be there. Now, in the book, it's really fascinating to me because I got C&T to do this because I was really worried about this. In the book, the color wheels aren't finished because I never had any intention of finishing them. So all of them in the last couple of weeks have gotten bindings.
Oh, wow.
So this one got orange and purple. And again, you can have fun with the color and different things that you're doing. So when I make color wheels, when I stitch them out just to see what the thread can do, or practice different stitches, or see how a thread would look if I did this or if I did that. So when I'm practicing, this kind of thing can happen. So if you're going to Road to California, you'll be able to see all of these quilts in one place.
And do you want to tell Chad a little bit about Road to California? When, where?
Yes. I am leaving Sunday for Road to California. I am teaching Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Monday and Wednesday, I am teaching beginner free motion machine quilting. So in that class, I'll be going over needle and thread pairings and how to adjust your tension on the machine, but also your personal tension. Because, quilters tend to do this, and it makes it super hard to quilt. I guess garment sewers do that too.
I think it's the universal sewing posture. Not
Yes.
supposed to, but that's where you end up.
Well, most of us have dining room table syndrome. So I am 5 feet tall. So most tables are too tall for me to begin with. So when I sit down at one, so I've learned some really wacko, coping mechanisms so that my arms stay kind of down at my side, and my hands are on the machine doing it. And if I'm doing really tiny work, I'm just quilting with my fingertips and having a whole grand time. So there's 2 beginner free motion machine quilting classes, and then I'm doing a class called Split the Complement: Color, Thread, and Ruler Work. And I am super excited about that because we're going to take the block from split complementarity. We're going to do some ruler work, creating the grid or the bones itself. And then we're going to play with color. Now, what my students don't know yet is I will have a boatload of thread with me so that they're bringing some thread, and then they can start adding things in to explore thread weight and thread texture and see what they can do with it over the course of the day. So we're going to do a little bit of ruler work. We're going to talk a little bit about color, and we're going to do a whole lot of stitching.
That sounds fantastic. And chat wants to know, are you teaching on a domestic machine or a long arm?
I am actually teaching on a domestic sewing machine. Up until this year, I have been a home sewing machine quilter. That's it. And I've had a standard size home sewing machine with needle space at 7 inches to the right of my needle. And I quilted split complementarity, which is about 100 by 110 on my home sewing machine.
Wow.
Yes. It can be done. It can be done. And I'm a shove it into the harp and quilt it kind of girl. I don't do any of this rolling things up and whatever. I use quilting is a full contact sport. I use my chest to help manage the quilt. So, I'm and by doing that, I'm making sure that I'm sitting close enough to the machine where I'm not, where I have to make sure that I'm sitting up and I'm not slouching, because that's also universal quilting posture. So I'm sitting up and I'm holding the quilt here as well as here. And if we remember, we're quilting something that's about this big, which is about pot holder size. Easy enough to quilt.
And then we do have a question in chat as well about ruler work. Do you want to give a brief explanation of ruler work and sort of how it relates to your class?
Sure. Doing ruler work, using rulers to create the quilting design has been popular probably for about the last 10, maybe 12 years. It started on the long arms and eventually moved its way to home sewing machines. And on home sewing, what I'm going to teach two things in class. Number one, how to manage a ruler. And those rulers are usually like 1/4 of an inch thick, maybe a little bit thicker, so that they're not going to slide under the foot that we're working with. And we don't want that, because it can hit the needle. And if it hits the needle, it can throw out the timing. And then our machine will go to the spot and we'll be sitting there going like this. So there's a special foot that you need to use that has a good lip to it. So the ruler doesn't slide underneath it. But the ruler can go on either side, and depending on the ruler foot that you have, even in the back behind the foot, and you just slide across, make sure that you're not pressing down so hard that you can't move the quilt. And the way that I use rulers is probably not the way that everybody else uses rulers. Let's face it, I don't do anything normally. So I will use rulers to make sure kind of that my lines are straight, but also like I'll go, oh, what would happen if I do this? And I'll take a particular ruler that I have, and I probably have about 7 or 8 right now. So I'm very limited in what I have for rulers, but I have a bunch of different curves and arcs and that kind of thing that I can explore with. And I go, okay, what happens if I do this? So I'll put like my clamshell ruler down and go like this. Okay, what if I just move it like over 1/4 of an inch? Oh, this could be really interesting. And if I'm on my home sewing machine, which I'll be teaching at Rhode, I can change my thread too. So then what I can do on top of that is see how a different color
Transition in the color. Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
So we can so this will be more like, it'll be basic ruler work, but it'll also be let's go play with the tools that we have.
That's
It'll be fun.
fantastic. And that'll be down in Ontario, California.
Mm-hmm. Not too far from you, I understand.
I have family down that way, but we're up here at C&T's up in Northern California. And
yay, we like C&T in Northern California.
Yeah. And I know that we have a couple of our authors that are going down, so that should be really fun. And hopefully everyone has a great time. And you get to teach some really exciting color work. And thank
And
you so
I
much
should
for
see
joining
Annie
us.
Smith for sure.
Oh, definitely. I think everyone's just really looking forward to events and doing things and getting to be creative again.
Mhm. It'll be fantastic. I'm like finishing up all the little things. I sent everything off to the printer today. Phew,
Just
need
about
that
ready
one.
to get going and get it done.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful having you. And again, color thread and free motion quilting is available through the C&T website. And if you have any questions for Teri, please feel free to leave them in the comments and we'll make sure those get answered. Thank you all, and thank you so much, Teri.
Thank you, Jessica. It's been great.